Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. And I'm sharing my screen. Get logged in here. Sample company. All right. So this is, what is this? Training session number 2 for end users. Okay. So today we're going to be covering the assess area of FutureFeed, system security plan, your FutureFeed system POAM, and deliverables. Um, in the previous session, I think I would have covered dashboard start, people, tools, and documents, but you guys are welcome to ask me any questions if it was something that was covered in the first session, but you just started doing the work in FutureFeed and you need some more guidance or have a couple questions, I don't mind fielding those during this session at all. So with that, I'm going to start talking about the assess page of FutureFeed, but does anyone have any questions that they'd like to start with? Okay. All right, so the assess area of FutureFeed. This is where you are documenting the status and details for the framework you have selected. So right now I'm in a level 2, but if you,
We gotta do this next one. Apologize.
that's okay, no worries. Um, if you're in a level 1 environment, your control set looks different. And then if you happen to be like 853 client, you'd see the 853 controls. So whatever framework you're in, the assess page is where you're going to be documenting the requirement or control status and details. And then just play around on this page. You have the ability to filter on status, or if you want to filter on, any of the controls that are assigned to you under the racing model. I don't think I have any in this sample environment, so nothing's showing up here. But if I did have a control or a requirement assigned to me in any of the RACI objectives, I would be able to filter by those here. We also do capture objective status change history. So if you're ever wanting to know if something was changed by someone else in your team, you can go ahead and click on that. And it's not filtered the greatest yet. I did submit a ticket to have them filter this activity from, most recent to oldest. And so that may change here in the future, but now the recommended approach to filling out FutureFeed was to first get people access to your FutureFeed environment, identify roles and teams involved, then identify your assets, move on to identifying your security control or your security documentation. And this whole time, as you are identifying people, tools, and documents, you are making connections to the requirements by this connect field here. Then the thought was, after you identify the people, tools, and documents, then you could go in and do almost a new gap assessment, new basic assessment, where you're reading the requirements and looking at the people you've associated, the documents you've associated, tools you've associated, and then kind of do another evaluation if something is met or not. That's just one way to approach using the tool. Now, I'm aware that a lot of clients of FutureFeed are coming to FutureFeed or starting to use FutureFeed, and they already have some sort of assessment results. Whether you did it in your own or you hired someone to do a gap assessment, basic assessment, you may already have results, and so you might just skip to this page here directly and start documenting those results. So I'm going to kind of tell you or, walk you through filling out this area, but what you have to do is going to be different and directly relates to your situation. The way you would approach this section if you don't have any results, you've never evaluated NIST 800-171, would be differently than if you're just copying and pasting those results from, a different assessment that was done. But I'll go over the fields, all of the sections, and just let me know if you have questions. So all of the requirements have these 6 sections here, and we'll go over them one at a time. So here I'm in the 318. And you have this requirement satisfaction summary section. This is where you're going to identify if requirements are implemented or not, so met or not met, or not applicable. And if something is identified as met, then you should have objective statement defining how it is met. If something is not met, then you should have a POA&M defining, what the issue is or why there was a failure and what's the plan to get that compliant. So what's your implementation plan or your remediation plan? So again, if something's met, try to have objective statement details. If something's not met, have a POA&M. You could have objective statement details for something that's not met, and you could still have a failure. You could, in this objective statement, you could identify what the implementation plan is. What would it look like if it were met? What's the goal? So it's okay if you have information in there. If something's not met, it's helpful. But at the very least, if you have something not met, have a POA&M. If something is met, then fill out that statement and fill out these summary notes. So the summary notes area is where you're at, a high level, big picture, defining how this requirement as a whole is implemented in your environment for all of your assessment scope assets. It's really important when you start evaluating or defining how these controls are implemented that you have a solid understanding of what your assessment scope is or your compliance boundary is. Once you start working in the assess area, if you're evaluating this objective, for example, you're evaluating if it's implemented for all assets in your assessment scope. External server, oh wow, I can't talk today. External service provider, ESP, external service provider assets. You're lumping those in, any cloud assets. So for example, how I've seen a lot of failures related, what's a good one here? I guess the subjective B is okay. So I'm a lead CCA, and one thing that led to a lot of failures during assessments is for this objective B, for example, the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is implemented. So I would go to an assessment and they would respond to this and say, yep, our Windows assets have a limit of logon attempts. And they would show me the evidence. And then I would say, okay, well, what about your Linux servers that you have? Or what about your firewall that you have as part of your boundary? Or what about your cloud hosted assets? And so they failed to either evaluate the implementation on all assessment scope assets, or they failed to address how it's implemented on all assets. And so it's really important you have a good understanding of that assessment scope or your compliance boundary. So when you're evaluating them, you're thinking about, is this implemented on all these different type of assets, all these different type of products, software? And then when you're addressing how it's implemented, make sure you address it for all implementation, the different implementations. And then your evidence you want to gather is make sure you get evidence for all your assets. So, this first one, defined means of limiting unsuccessful log attempts is defined. Here we have a statement that says it's defined in the access control policy. That's acceptable. That is perfectly fine. If you define something elsewhere, that is, do not let an assessor fail you because it's not defined in your system security plan. That's just a bad assessor. So you could define it like this, or you could say the means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined, you know, as 5 attempts in 15 minutes after. So what all I'm just trying to show you is you need to have that definition. This objective is looking for a definition. It needs to be somewhere in your system security plan documentation set. It does not need to be defined in your system security plan. You can define it in your system security plan, or you can define it in like a policy or some external document. My only suggestion to you is that have that definition in just one place. I'm going to turn that back to what it was. Try not to have it defined in 2 different places. Like, I wouldn't define it in my system security plan and also define it in my policy, because that way, if something changes, then you have to worry about going and updating that definition in multiple places. And that's, if you miss that and you go into an assessment, you could end up with a failure because you have 2 different definitions, conflicting definitions, okay? So my recommendation to you guys is just have one source of truth for all of these requirements, one source of truth, and then just refer to that source of truth whenever you need to, okay? So here I'm saying it's defined in my access control policy. So an assessor is going to want to see that evidence. They're going to want to see your access control policy, and they're going to look at it to see if this definition is in fact in there. So in these objective statements or in the summary notes area, if you mention a document, then it should be found down below under the examination area where your documents get housed. Here's my access control policy. So do make sure that this examine area, interview area, and the test area, these 3 sections here, they align with your implementation narratives. So with these objective statements or this summary notes area. What you say up top should match the evidence you have down below. So that way your assessment is more smooth, right? If you mention a document, process, a procedure, a checklist, a form. All that evidence should be found down below under the examine area. Okay. And then if you mention a team, like here in this statement, I say, the defined means of limiting unsuccessful login attempts is implemented by a local setting in the firewall, which is managed by my IT admin, which is set to match the policy. So this IT admin team, I would have them, identified in the interview area. As either they'd be in this responsible section, and I'd link my system admin team. Do I have one in here? System and network administrators. Okay. So if you call out a person, a team, a role in these summary notes or the objectives, make sure that they are also identified in this interview section. Because you're telling me up above that someone is responsible for doing something. From an assessor's point of view, I'm going to want to talk to that someone. So having this area filled out for interview, moving into an assessment, you're going to know exactly everyone who needs to be present that week of the assessment because they could potentially get interviewed. Normally, the C3PAO assessment team is going to give you an assessment schedule and tell you, hey, on this day, we want to review the incident response requirements. And so you would make sure that all of the people you have identified in this interview section under the incident response family, all these people, you would make sure that they're at work that day when the assessment team is going to be reviewing the IR requirements, so that way they can field any questions and be interviewed, right? So, and the last thing here, summary notes and objective statements. If I mention any technology, so here I said, I have Windows assets, I have a firewall, and I have an application called Prevail. So all the technology, all the tools, the vendors, external service providers, IT products, software, that I mention in this statement or the summary notes should be found down underneath the test area. Okay. This is where your technology, your tools get linked. So interview is people, examine is documentation, test is the technology, and then I have my Entra ID, my firewall, my Prevail software, and my Windows. Okay, so we use in this assess area of FutureFeed, we're using the assessment method terms. Any C3PAO assessors, they are taught and tested on. They're taught to, when they do an assessment, they have 3 methods they can use to validate if something's implemented. The 3 methods they will use is interview, examine, and test. They want to talk to you. They're going to talk to you about all 110 requirements. They interview for every requirement, all 110. Examine, they want to see evidence for all 110. And then test, they can't test all 110 requirements. They try to test as much as they can, but there's just some controls they can't test on. A test would be, for example, this one, since we're under this one here, limit unsuccessful logon attempts. I don't think they would do this, but they could ask you, hey, make me an account, make me a test account, and then they'll try to log in with that test account, and they'll keep logging in, and purposely mess up the password or whatever to see how many attempts it's going to take to get locked out. So that's a test. They're actually performing the objective to see if it's implemented. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Back up here. All right. So if you mark something not met, for example, this first one here, this objective A right now has a plus. If I mark something not met, it's going to create for me that first POA&M entry, which is great because then you don't put yourself in a position where you have not met objectives and you forgot to create the POA&M because that would be a failure. Any objectives, any requirements that are not implemented or not met, they need to be on your system POA&M. And so FutureFeed creates that first one for you so you can't forget about it. But I could go in here, mark it complete, and it's gonna switch it back to met. So whenever you create a POA&M, you should make it a point then to open up that first POA&M entry that FutureFeed creates and modify it. Okay. So this poem description area is where you would define maybe, what the failure was, and more importantly, what's the plan to get compliant? So what's your implementation plan? If you're just starting to work on implementing these requirements, then you would have an implementation plan, your plan for implementing. Or, if you've implemented these requirements and you're sitting at a 110 score, and every year you do your annual assessment, your annual internal assessment every year. Well, if a year from now I'm evaluating this control and it fails because I had someone go into my Entra ID and they deleted the policy that was enforcing this requirement for all my windows. So now I failed. In which case, that's a remediation plan. But either way, implementation plan and remediation plan all is same goal of becoming compliant. So in this poem description area, you would want to modify this to be specific to your environment and what needs to be done within your environment to get compliant. It will come pre-populated with some poem description here, but this is just meant to be helpful and help you get started with writing out that implementation or remediation plan. Definitely when a poem gets created, very important then to go and get it assigned to the people you want to do the work. So make sure you identify at the very least who's responsible for doing the work. And then if you can define the accountable, consulted, and informed objectives, that's great. But at the very least, have at least one of these objectives filled out with a team or a role or a person. And then set impact, effort, and cost if you want to use that feature, and definitely set a due date. Okay. You can create more than one POA&M item. So let's do that for this one, this objective B. And it's all preference. It's all how you guys want to use your POA&M. I've worked at many different agencies, and the POA&M management plan was different at all agencies. So it's really your preference. But for this one here, the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts. I say my windows are doing something, I have a firewall that's doing something, and Prevail that's doing something. So here, let's say I said this one is not met. Well, this first POA&M item, maybe I'll make it for my windows. Windows, please provide screenshot of config setting. Okay, get that assigned to my Windows. If I had a Windows system administrator, assign it to them. Set a due date. Okay, close it out. Hit save if you're gonna do that. I didn't hit save, so But then I might want to make another poem and make this one for my, what did I say? I have a firewall, so maybe my firewall. Okay. So you have the capability to create more than one poem. Maybe your Windows devices are already compliant, but you just need evidence. So you create a poem to get the evidence, but your firewall is not compliant. It actually has to be configured. So you'd create another poem for the firewall. Or you lump it all into one poem. It's completely your call on how you want to do it. But you do have the capability to create more than one poem item. Here now I have two for this one objective. Um, okay. So inheritance real quick. Let's talk about inheritance. We have the capability, or we provide you with the capability to identify inheritance down to the objective level, which is important in CMMC 171. So here in this statement, I say Windows, my Windows boxes are being managed by Entra ID settings, which a company called Company ABC. They're an external service provider, and they are responsible for Entra ID management and configuring and managing the endpoints. Okay, so I have some inheritance here. I have an external party doing some work for me that is meeting a requirement from NIST 800-171. Down here, firewall, I say the firewall, it's all my company's responsibility. We manage the firewall, we configure it, we have the system admin who does the work. So no inheritance there. And then for my Prevail software, I say it's fully inherited, and Prevail, the software provider, is responsible for doing that work. So I have definitely inheritance here. It's not this objective here, B, it's not fully inherited because that would mean inheritance for Windows, inheritance for Firewall, and Prevail. But because Firewall is my responsibility, it's partially inherited overall. So make sure your inheritance icon is set correctly. I wouldn't say it's fully inherited because my company has some responsibility for doing some of the work, so it's partially inherited overall. And then when that happens, I'll show you up here, I'll put this one as partially. This little yellow triangle will pop up, and it's FutureFeed is saying, hey, you just said you have some inheritance for this objective. Please tell me where that inheritance is coming from. And so you would click on that little yellow triangle and now identify where that inheritance is coming from, who's doing it, and the tool. So here, my Entra ID was being managed by company ABC, so I'd check that box. No inheritance for my firewall, and full inheritance for Prevail, so I'd check that box. Also, I would check Windows Pro 11 because my endpoints, there's some inheritance there because it's coming from Entra ID, coming from ABC. So do make sure that if you call out in your objective statements or in that summary notes area up here, if you say there's an external entity doing some work for you that is helping you meet NIST 800-171 objectives or requirements, that's referred to as inheritance. And so if you say that, make sure that your inheritance icon aligns with that statement and you identify where that inheritance is coming from. Okay, a couple things here I want to show you because this gets a little tricky is, let me go down here quick and let me see if I can add something here. So I'm going to add this one just to show you. So now I have two Entra IDs connected to this this control here. If I go up here, let me refresh though, because it may not take. If I go up here and I click on this triangle, or I could click on the 4, it don't matter. Notice here now, there's my 2 Entra IDs. One I can click on, one of them I cannot click on. And that's because, so if you see the technology listed here, if you see the tool or product, whatever, listed here, but you can't click on it, that's because you haven't set, well, I'll show you. I'll just better show you. That's because if I scroll down, notice how one Entra ID has this CRM flag and this one doesn't. So how you get this CRM flag to show up, which CRM stands for Customer Responsibility Matrix. It has to do with inheritance. So if you want to identify technology in this inheritance area, it does have to have this CRM flag. And to get that, you just click on the asset and right here. So right now I have, if I was reading this from an assessor point of view or a GRC point of view, this asset here is managed by my company. But if I see that there's some shared responsibility or customer responsibility, that tells me now that this asset is managed by company ABC, or there's some shared responsibility there. So you do have to set this CRM flag in order for now. If I close out, give it a second or refresh the page. Now I have that CRM flag and now I can click on it up here. So if you just don't see the tool you want to click, if you don't see any listing here, then that means you haven't connected it down below. So you have to go down and connect whatever it is. And then if you see it, but you can't select on it, it means you haven't set that, you haven't identified that tool as having some external shared responsibility. And so you have to go in here and set the CRM flag, and then you should be able to click it up here. Any questions? Okay, so that's the requirement satisfaction summary area. There's a nice video you can watch, a little bit more about the requirement. This internal discussion area here relates to and is connected to this discussion area here, is connected to this discussion area. So just play around with that a little bit. But if I create an internal discussion here, and by the way, this is not included in your system security plan. So you could see I did this a little bit earlier today. You know, if you don't want to create a POA&M that talks about, hey, provide me evidence, you could just do it here. Provide me screenshot. And then you can make who wants the visibility, who all do you want to see this comment? Discussion participants, which you can control who's in that chat. My organization means anybody who has access to your FutureFeed environment except an assessor can see the chat. And then if you want to make a comment that you want your assessor to see, then you would click on Assess Team. So in FutureFeed, when you create an account, you have 3 roles. You have admin, standard, and assessor. So anybody you give the assessor role to is part of the assess team, and they would be able to see that comment. So here I'm going to make it my organization. Anybody can see this comment and hit submit. I'm going to flag it for maybe we got, what is this? Let's see, question, submit. Now, instead of having to navigate to this specific control, which is 318, you could just go up here into the discussions area, go down to questions, because remember I set the question flag, and then here, give it a minute. This always takes a second to load here. But that's my question. And or this one was, I forget, this one, and I set the question flag. So there's observation, finding, question. Any questions with that? So the different chat areas, the discussion areas under the controls, this one here. And if you click on the objectives here, you have another one. I thought there was one in here. Wait. Huh. Okay. Wait, is it this? Oh, right here. You click on that little icon. Okay. So, and then if you've, set the flags, you can find them up here. Any questions?
I do have one. So what about if you have like a service like a single sign-on service that ties back to like for like our learning portal, and it goes back to our Entra identity basically to entitle them, our users. We're going from two externals basically. We have two technologies. Can we call from one to another inherited, kind of response, can we have that single sign-on inherit from our Entra and inherited matrix, I guess there. Do you understand what I'm asking there a little bit? Try not to
Yeah,
get too far in.
I think your question is, can you have inheritance? Can you have two different external inheritance for one tool or one requirement?
Yeah.
Yes, the answer is
Okay.
yeah.
It'll show up in the list to just add them as a technology or
Yeah.
a provider, CRM.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Guidance here, we have this area where if you need to learn a little bit more about the requirement, some clarification, discussion references there. Every control has a guidance, shows the point. You can change the order of these things up if you're interested in moving them about. And then the last thing that I'll show you is this copy control. So what this is where you can like copy all of the data that I put in 318 and I could send it over to maybe 3111, let's say. So here I'm in 318 and I could go look for the 3111. You have summary notes, interview, exam, and test. And so if you wanted to send all that work over to another control, you could select them all. But maybe you just want to we made some recommendations, okay? So this 318, it's very technical. It's a technical control. You usually have system admins, developers, external service providers involved here. And so we're making a recommendation that everyone you identified in this interview section as responsible, accountable, consulted, most likely are the same people that you're going to have involved with these controls here, because these are all very technical. 312, that's technical. That's a role and permission. Role and permission, this is technical. Least privilege. All of these have some technical implementation, session lock, session termination. And so we're making a recommendation that you copy the interview, the people you've identified in that interview section over to these controls. And this copy control functionality. It's just simply meant to help you like populate FutureFeed a little bit more quickly. Of course, when you copy this data over, then you would go to that control 3111, read it, and clean up the connections. So if I've copied data over and I read this control, okay, well, maybe Raven doesn't need to be identified here, so we'll just clean up some of those connections. But that's the copy control functionality. All right, and then so we got through one section here. But interview, any questions about the interview? This is important because think about this assess area. You're not just setting up the assess area to help you with that C3 PAO assessment. You're going to have a requirement to do an annual internal assessment. And every year when you got to do that assessment, you're going to go to this assess page, see who's identified under a responsible, and interview those folks or update them if you need to. So, any questions with the interview section? Okay, examine section, any questions here? You're linking and connecting your document evidence from up here. Um, Test is tools, okay? And then we have an area where you can upload additional artifacts if you need to, additional screenshots or reports, anything for this one requirement. And then these potential assessment considerations, if you are doing that internal assessment and you're not sure what to ask or what to look for, these are just some questions that an assessor would ask to help you do that evaluation internally. So that's the assess area. Of course, the goal would be all 110 are green, complete. But if you're just getting started with FutureFeed, you'll want to do a basic or gap assessment. If you're interested, we do have this rapid gap assessment mode. So right now, as I showed you, if I click into one of these controls, all 6 sections are listed out. And if I want to go to the next control, I got to go up here and hit next. We do have a gap mode. If you click on this hamburger icon right here next to access control, click on that. And if I click on this rapid gap assessment mode or this little running icon, now we have listed out all of the AC controls in just this section. So here's 311, 312, 313. Okay, so they're listed all in one page and you don't have all those other sections to deal with. You're just scrolling through. Is something defined? Yes or no? What's this? Okay, yes or no. It's doing that quick gap assessment or basic assessment. Um, all right, the system security plan, stop here. This is a browser view of your system security plan. If you go over into the deliverables under SSP and export your SSP, run an SSP report and export it, it's going to have the same information and the same fields, the same data as what's displayed here in the browser view of your SSP. So this area is just a nice browser view of your SSP so you can easily navigate the different sections of your system security plan. And if something's inaccurate, for example, if my system details was accurate, I'd go back, hit the edit, and now it brings me back to that place where I have that information listed so I can quickly update it and then go back to my SSP and mark it reviewed. So you can use this compliance review section here or these reviewed flags here. It tracks history of people marking things reviewed, but we've provided either with this compliance review or this review flag down here, you can log when sections of your system security plan have been reviewed or approved. So here, this is my system information, moderate, high, this CIA impact ratings here. Your system administrator may not know what that means, but maybe your compliance or your consultant that you're working with does. So you would assign them this page, and then maybe over here in the requirements section is where you assign this to your system admin because they're going to know more about the technical implementation and stuff like that. So you could use this compliance review flag however you'd like, or you can just track and mark the sections as reviewed when you go through them like that. Your FutureFeed POA&M, that's here. So as you were creating tools and documents and documenting your assessment results, you were creating POA&M entries along the way. Here I have 142 POA&M items in this sample company fake environment. That's a lot of different items to manage. So what we've done is we've implemented this project builder. The goal would be then that you group like non-compliance. Okay, let me see if I have something for if I type in like audit. Let's see. A lot come up. So here's a 336 audit records reduction, audit report capability, audit event and logging failure, content. So you would go through and group like non-compliance, or, if you, for example, this one here, let's say I have one guy who's working on my audit logging capability, and he's my SEAM system administrator, my audit log system administrator. So I'd group all of the things that he's going to work on, all these things, into one project, create a project, and I call it like SEAM work or SEAM implementation, configuration, whatever have you. And now instead of the goal would be to try to put everything into a project. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some things that will be like one-off items and they can't really be part of a project. But the goal would then be, and now instead of me having to handle 142 different line items and review each one and try to figure out, okay, who's working on it? Is the work happening, or is there an issue? Is there a roadblock? Have people forgotten about it? Maybe that person left the company and they're not doing nothing. Nobody's doing work on it. You have to manage your system poem. You have to stay on top of these until they get remediated. And so 142 line items is a lot to process. But if I group a bunch of them, now I may have 5 or 6 different one-off items, and then I just have to focus on these projects here. So after you create a project, you'd go in and find the one that I created and fill out the rest of this data. Get it assigned to someone, impact, effort, cost, start, due date, all this metadata here. Use what you want to. There's a project status, any sort of cost associated with the project, documentation, and now here's all of the individual requirements or poem items that they're going to work on as part of this one project. Over here under Project Builder, if you filter by proposed projects, anything with a plus means it's not part of a project. So maybe it's not supposed to be a part of a project, but if you want to try to get them all into one, into a project, so you can just focus on the projects instead of the individual poems, then filter over here. Okay, this one looks very technical. It's technical and audit related. So, well, I guess this one's the audit rated. So this one's the technical implementation. Maybe I'll assign this to my Windows System Admin project because he's going to implement that. And then this next one is about capturing something in audit log. So I'm going to assign that one to that SEAM one. Okay. Now they're both part of a project and I don't have to worry about following up on just those individually, because if I go over to my project, they're part of that project. So that's a good field to filter by, is proposed projects over here. And then the ones with the plus are not part of a project. They're individual poem items. You can export over here. The filters, by the way, if you filter something and I log out of FutureFeed, I log in tomorrow, that filter is going to stay. So if you're ever worried, like you can't find something, check to see if you have a filter on. You can change up the columns, identify what you want to see in the columns, and export to Excel over here as well. Any questions on the poem? All right, so over here in deliverables, you can run a poem report, but notice over here, if I run a poem report, it's just going to be a Word document. So if you do want the Excel version, export it from your FutureFeed poem over here. Also under deliverables, you could do an SSP report or a quick SSP report and some data needed to submit your score into the SPRS or the PIE system. Under SSP report, if I generate a report and I hit download, which I'm not going to do right now because it may take a minute, it logs that in the history. And if you go down here and you click on one of the reports from your history section, hit edit, you have a couple other things you can capture, like if this SSP version that you generated and export hasn't been approved, and approval date. Why did you run a new report of your SSP? Was it because you changed something? So you could think of this version notes as like your revision history table, or you can even come up with your own versioning number if you'd like. Did you submit to SPRS? Okay. And what day? So there's some other stuff you can capture. If you want to capture the approval of your SSP, you could do so here. Now, I know it just logs the name and date. I did ask the team if we could add in that signature capability that you kind of see up top and in a few other places. It'd be nice to capture a signature there, but that's not implemented yet, hopefully soon. And exports, you can export all the data that you put into FutureFeed, all the files, all the evidence, documents you put into FutureFeed, you can export that. When you meet with your C3PAO assessor, one thing you're going to want to do, well, you have to do is you have to give them like all of your evidence up front so they can review your documentation to include your SSP and your policies, procedures, all this stuff. So I would expect when that time comes and you have to pass all that stuff over to your assessor, you'd do this export here for the files and the data. And you could export your poem or a listing of your poem projects. And then over presentations, this is the ability to create reports or presentations using the data you put into FutureFeed. So let's pretend that you did want to meet with that SEAM administrator and present him that project that you just created. You just choose what you want visible in that report. So I don't care to talk to them about the assessment. I don't know, maybe I want to show them just the score though. And what else? I want to meet with them to talk about a project. So I'm going to make sure that that one project about SEAM implementation here is visible. All right, so now if I push play, I should have SPRS, information on SPRS, and then information on that project. So here's my SPRS or my score. And then if I go over, here's the project and the parts of the project. All of this is blank. All this is TBD and empty because I didn't fill it in, but you would make it a point to fill it in, and then you'd have a lot more data shown here. And then here are all the individual poem items that I added to that one project. Okay, so if you download the report, it looks more like a report, a nice professional report. If you're presenting out a FutureFeed, it does look more like maybe a presentation PowerPoint. Okay, but you can present on your assessment scope, your system security plan, your score, all your poem stuff. You can present on, individual responsibility that's assigned, and there's a bunch of stuff that you can report on for compliance management purposes. All right, we have 4 minutes left, so I will open up the floor to any last questions, comments. Do you want to see anything?
Quick question. On when you're setting dates and when deliverables are due back, I noticed that it's pretty much set for like quarters. Is there a
Yeah.
place to set it where we can do faster? Like, let's say we want to do a shorter time frame. I want somebody to get the data to me in a week. Is there a place to set that into the system?
So poems are by quarters only. The
Okay.
poem, anything you create a poem for, it will be using the quarters, like here. Um, oh, but you can switch to dates over here. Switch it to dates there, and you can do a date.
Okay.
But tasks, I don't think tasks automatically default to quarters. I think the tasks you can set the date. So, yes, to answer your question, yes, you can do date or quarters for poem items. And then your tasks, like let's say here I'm in my poem and I want someone to start working on this diagram. And I want to create a task specifically for this poem item to get work started. I would click on it, go over here, create a task. Hey, status. And now I can set a due date. And it doesn't default to quarters in the tasks area here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So that, thank you, Chris. That brought up a question for me thinking about the calendar tasks like our Nessus monthly update and vulnerability scans. Is
Mhm.
can you go over that real quickly? I didn't kind of catch anywhere where that was
Yeah,
going to
that's
be at.
okay. So that's going to be in the document section, and you get
Okay,
to
so back there.
decide where you want to create that task. But okay, let's go with the vulnerability scanner one. Um, I don't know what documentation you have, but if you have a vulnerability scanning policy, you might want to create that task there. If you have vulnerability scanning procedures, then create the task there. If you have a vulnerability scanning worksheet or checklist, create the task there. It's up to you where you want to create the task, but you create the task in the documents. So here I would go look for here I have vulnerability scanning procedures is probably where I would create that task. Over here, then create let's say you're doing it weekly, vulnerability scan. Be clear on the notes. Run, scan, take, report, and upload into the evidence area of FutureFeed. Notify, oops, notify, notify ism of open bones. Like, be descriptive here in this notes area because you want them to do it's this part particular capturing or gathering that evidence is really important. So here I'm saying run the scan and then in this evidence area upload the report or upload it wherever you want them to have it. Looks like don't click off of it though because it doesn't save. But anyway, yada yada yada, and then get it assigned to someone and make it repeat for weekly. And once the task is triggered for the week, they have 7 days to finish. Maybe we'll give them 5 days to finish the task, and it never ends and hit submit. So now, who did I assign it to? Amy Barnes, maybe? Yeah, Amy. So now Amy, this is messy because there's a lot of tasks created in here for just people playing around, or maybe I did it in a previous training, but whoever you have assigned is going to get an alert notification. Hey, it's time for the weekly vulnerability scan. They can click on the task and upload the evidence that you're requesting them to upload and mark things complete. And then when you complete a task, so let's complete this here, um, they can make notes. Task completed, report sent to ISM. And then they're going to hit save and complete and do a signature, maybe more notes. And now in the evidence area, it's showing that this task has been completed by me on this date. And if I click on it, there's my notes. And then also in here, if you directed them to upload maybe the vulnerability scanning report or upload a screenshot of the vulnerability scanning activity, you know, any other evidence you wanted them to capture, they would not only they'd close out that task, and that task would be captured as evidence because the activity is evidence in itself, but then they could go in here and add any additional evidence that you wanted them to add. So that's where you would create here um, in the documents. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And made me think to separate the task of updating the database board as a separate task. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. And so many different ways you could do it. Once you figure it out and you get a nice flow, though, the tasks, you're creating tasks for like getting things done, getting POA&M items done, getting the requirements initially implemented, but then take some time to start building out those tasks that reoccur throughout the year. So that way, whatever has to happen throughout the year gets done, and that activity gets logged in FutureFeed, and the evidence gets logged in FutureFeed as it gets completed. Any other questions? Okay, well, so you guys would have completed the training, but you guys are welcome to, um, you know, sign up for any more of these training sessions that you need. If you just go to FutureFeed's website and the training page, you can sign up again for these. We do have a weekly session here, the 15 minutes with FutureFeed. It happens every Thursday. So if you haven't joined that, you might want to sign up for that. But yeah, good luck, and reach out to support@futurefeed.co if you need any more training, or join that Thursday session if you have one-off questions, or, you know, you need support along the way. That's what that Thursday session is all about.
Is there a recording from yesterday going to be sent out, Rachel? Not to mix it in with this one. I
Oh,
didn't
that's
see an
okay.
email for the PowerPoint slides or the recording. I did not see that coming back out to us yet. Like
Yeah,
like
it
like your
will.
class on Tuesday, I got that one.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. No, yesterday's webinar, it just it will be sent out here soon. They're just working on cleaning up the
Thank you.
recording, I guess, and making
Perfect.
but you'll get something soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Have a great day.
you too. Bye all.
Thank you.
I don't know how to get out of here now. Okay.